Yeah, good evening and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Sports Bar on talkSPORT. Me, Max Scott, alongside Carlton Cole on a deeply sad day for football, a deeply sad day for this country as we lost an English footballing icon, the late, great Kevin Keegan.
The fans here thrive on heroes.
The Geordie public adore him.
Reception awaiting the two-time European Player of the Year and former England captain when he signed for Second Division Newcastle.
You often hear it said that people have a charisma and real magnetism around them. And wow, Kevin Keegan has got that by the bucket load.
What he done as well, he had the reputation, but he delivered. He delivered on the pitch.
Kind of sick, you know, it's fairy tale stuff.
He gave them hope, he gave them happiness.
Kevin Keegan scores and his career on Tyneside turns full circle. He scored on his debut and now in his final game he's provided the goal the fans were praying for.
And I seen what he gave to this football club and he lifted us out of the doldrums.
Very moving, and I thank everyone up here for the tremendous way they've not received me over the last 2 years and the way they've seen me off. It's been very nice and made it all, from my point of view, very worthwhile.
Yeah, former England captain and manager Kevin Keegan has died at the age of 75, 7 weeks after he revealed he'd been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Tributes have been rolling in across talkSPORT. If you've been listening, if you've been reading online, some incredibly touching and moving tributes to an absolute icon. And we're ever so thankful to be joined now by the iconic football commentator Martin Tyler. Martin, thanks so much for joining us. Such a shame it's under such sad circumstances. And before we discuss the immense legacy that he's left, what were your sort of first thoughts upon hearing this sad news?
Well, first of all, sympathies to Jean and the family. That was my first thought. I knew Kevin and Jean when they were just really getting together back in the mid-1970s. Went to what was then Kevin's home in North Wales. But I suppose the first emotion really was to think that somebody who packed so much energy into his football playing career and his management career could find that energy is there no more. That he was a great person to be around. He was addictive in the sense it rubbed off on you. You know, you wanted to. It was almost like a Pied Piper. You wanted to follow. We in the media, of course, trying to be impartial, but it was very hard to do that because he was such a good player. And he was such a good person. He embodied the most important factor, I think, of not just football, but life. He worked hard every day. He gave every day the best version of himself. And the rewards for that were considerable. I first came across him when he was a young player, before he even went to Liverpool. And he had this reputation at Scunthorpe that he would do all the training. Some of the old pros weren't too bothered about doing the cross-country. But Kevin would do it, even if somebody said, well, if we duck through here, we can cut half a mile off our run. And he wouldn't do it. He wanted to do every step and do it properly. And he did everything properly. And infectious personality, great charisma. It's a word that's been used a lot about him. I had my tick to that. And we guessed it might happen because obviously his announcement, as you mentioned, a few weeks ago, that he wasn't in great shape. But he's had a wonderful life.
Yeah. How you doing, Martin? How are you?
I'm fine, Carly.
Long time, mate. Long time.
Yeah. Always good to talk to you.
Always good to talk to you, Martin. Listen, obviously, he was one of England's most decorated players, you know, and he travelled. He went loads of places to go and play his football. Great ambassador of the game. You shared a parallel journey with his career during your time commentating, and what moments do stick out for you particularly?
I think one of the first cup finals I worked on, not as a commentator, but as just a helper for ITV, who gave me my first chance in television, was that 74 cup final when he did so well for Liverpool against Newcastle. Ironically, as having no idea, of course, at that time what was going to happen as his career developed. And because of that, Liverpool played in the Charity Shield the following August, and Kevin got sent off. You know, real set to with Billy Bremner. It wasn't very charitable from either of them, but Kevin sent a message to us at ITV. I was working on the preview show. It's called On the Ball Before the Satan Grizzly, that he'd like to have his say. And I was dispatched up to where the family home was and do this interview where he was, I thought it would be very tricky, that I would have to maybe almost sort of wheedle a couple of answers out of him. He was right straight at it. He held up his hand, explained why it had happened, apologized for it happening. And that, from that moment, it was a bit of a bond, really, that we'd done that together. And in a way, he was clear of that in his own conscience. But he was proud, very proud of his roots, Yorkshireman, and really just a big person in a relatively small body, I suppose. Really, when you were in the room with him, you knew he was there, and it was a privilege to spend some time with him. Obviously, as a manager, I spent maybe a bit closer. I was trying to chisel the team news out of him a few times.
Martin,
it's always helpful.
Sorry, Martin. One of the things I can't remember him as a player. Certainly, I'm 33, but I went to school in Doncaster, in Cantley, where he was from, and one of the things that, as someone that now speaks for a living, one of the things that was so impressive for me, whether it was watching him as a manager and some of the iconic moments there, or whether it's looking back at some of the clips, is he's such an articulate and passionate, authentic communicator, and that's so refreshing. And you must have found that particularly someone that would interview him and speak to him on a regular basis as part of your work.
It was a piece of cake to interview him, to be honest. He always understood why we were there, and I don't remember having to come across him one or two of those awkward ones. The one, of course, he did on Monday Night Football on Sky with down the line to, I guess it was Richard Keys and Andy Gray, about the end of season and the implication that from Manchester United that things were not as they should be.
I think it was Jeff. I think it was Jeff Shreves that was interviewing him that day. On mic.
It could easily have been Cully,
yeah.
But that was an awkward interview, but he said it like it was, and he was always like that. And one of the strange ones I remember, I did an amazing game where he was manager of Manchester City, and they played away at Spurs. We were 3-0 down at half-time, and Joey Barton got himself sent off, walking off with the referee. They came out with 10 men and they won 4-3, which was amazing. One of the sort of classic comebacks. But went to speak to him afterwards, and he was still berating the fact that they hadn't played well in the first half. What was supposed to be total joy, because he was very professional. He set very high standards, and those standards were not just to play efficient football, but entertaining football. And I think Sky took the credit that they coined the Newcastle team the Entertainers in the 90s, and that was certainly well named.
Yeah, listen, he was such a loved man, and he had a huge impact on probably everyone's lives around him, and not just obviously with me growing up as a young pup and watching him with that famous rant that he had, that was unbelievable. But are there any other things that you could tell us about the great man?
I think his awareness of his position in the affections of the public. The story goes that when he was at Doncaster, not a player at Doncaster, a fan of Doncaster Rovers, you asked for an autograph for one of those players, and that player refused the autograph, and he vowed that if ever he was going to become somebody whose autograph would be coveted, he would never say no. And England, when he was in charge of England at Burnham Beech's hotel, I'd go over and maybe watch the training on the day before England played, or a couple of days before. And Kevin said, "Well, come back to the hotel. We'll have a bit of lunch, and I'll speak to you after lunch."
Wow.
Then he never went to lunch on time because he signed every autograph.
Wow.
If people knew, word got around if you got there and Kevin was about, and I can remember thinking, well, you still got to go and have your lunch, Kev. I'll wait then. But it was a pleasure to see him do it, because he was aware of his public responsibility, and he was, I suppose, one of the first players to be more than just a footballer. He was a true personality. He would get on the front pages in the right way, and the football pages, he would be a symbol of patriotism, of loyalty to the club. A small but very square person, but a biggest heart, and gave everything every day. And that is infectious. And it's also on a day like this, which is so sad, to remember what values he had and how we should all live up to them.
Yeah.
Martin, look, you've mentioned it there. Kevin was a proud Englishman, not just as a player, but as a manager. And I've seen doing the rounds the video of him where he called time on his career as England manager, and in what for many managers would be a dark moment, he somehow made this moment of class and total honesty and authenticity. And I guess sort of just on that point about England, you've commentated on England. I wonder sort of how, now the dust settling on the World Cup, Martin, sort of how do you sort of evaluate England's World Cup that we've just seen?
Well, I did the game against Argentina. That was my last game. I came home on Friday. And I would like to remember it, and more importantly, for it to be remembered, that's the best World Cup campaign that England have ever had outside of England. Finished third. I know it might not mean too much, lost a semi-final all the same, but we were fourth in 1990, we were fourth in 2018. So to be in the top three, to get a medal, to get the medals for the players, I think that should be taken into account. I would like to add one other thing, boys. All the talk about when I was calling the game in Atlanta, and when Anthony Gordon was taken off and Ezri Konsa came on, that looked like a move that cost England the game. But just reflect on the second half of the France game 3 days later. England were 4-0 up at half-time and letting 4 goals in the second half. So who's to say that England might not have lost with that approach as well? I don't think you can say, it would have certainly worked. Bukayo Saka is the symbol of it, a wonderful hat-trick that he got against the French.
Yeah.
But who's to say, had he come on, whether it might have been those defensive frailties, might have been vulnerable. And so I don't think you can say on one thing. I thought they gave it a really, really good effort. Some of the games, and look at, Spain had maybe to let in 1 goal was just an amazing thing. We'll find out in September, won't we? England play Spain in the Nations League. So it'll be interesting to see I think it would have been a much better final if it had been Spain against England.
Yeah.
I think in defence of Argentina, and not many people would like me to start a sentence like that, but they got 1 day less rest from the semi-final, and that was the semi-final I was at, and the intensity of their play and their celebrations after. In fact, I was on the air with your own Andy Townsend, and we were saying, well, they have got a game to play, and they were still dancing around like kids, and we know Messi's 39, but there are others that who are in 30s as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that lack of the day's rest, Spain were younger, they probably didn't need that extra day. And maybe the youth came. I don't think Messi had a moment in the final, really.
No.
Cole, you've been through it. You get to a point where you do need your recovery time.
Yeah.
Toward the end of your playing time.
Yeah.
To have a day less than the opposition would be in the back of your mind, maybe. But nobody said anything about that.
Yeah. In elite football, Martin, it's all about the time you get to recover. And as you get older, the time becomes less and less, and more time you need to get, because there's so much games now. It's all condensed. But one of the big talking points was an interview with Tuchel and Bellingham's response. As a reporter yourself, what did you make of all of that, or was it a setup? Was it to get the team to disrupt the team, or was there questions valid to set up some kind of conflict between the two?
Well, I'll be honest. I'll throw an Arsene Wenger at you. I haven't heard it. I know. I do know what you're talking.
Yeah, there was a little bit of back and forth.
I think it was a misunderstanding, use of words, and the timing of it. There would be no way it would be a setup, no way it would be deliberate. And the reporter in question, Gabriel Clark, is a thoroughly respected professional. I'm sure he's been very hurt by the way it's been perceived, with no intention on his part to drive a wedge between a player and a manager. So I just think it was unfortunate. in the end, I mean, Jude's ended up playing brilliantly. He's obviously the future of England. I don't think too much harm was done. These things happen in the touchline, the tunnel, quick interviews. Sometimes you can say the wrong thing in just the use of words and not mean to provoke a reaction, which can happen with somebody who's perhaps trying to explain why the situation had happened, why the team had not played well. So, but I genuinely haven't heard the details of it, but I'm sure it's something that can be easily smoothed over.
And just finally, Martin, you know, on the great man himself, King Kevin Keegan, how will you remember him?
As a symbol of all the best values in football, a winner, but doing it the right way with the maximum amount of effort that he could ever muster, and somebody that you were always pleased to have the privilege of being in the same company. He was just a lovely man. But with that, you can't be a successful sportsman, especially in football, without having that harder edge. He knew what it took to be successful. He did it in a way where I can't think of him ever being offensive or causing any trouble. He just wanted to make people smile. He had a lovely smile himself. And of course, he came into broadcasting and he did do some co-commentary as well. And it was always a pleasure to see him around. And it's devastating to think we won't see him around again.
Martin, absolutely beautiful words and a brilliant tribute. We kept you longer than we probably asked you to come on for, but it was well worth it. Thank you.
We love Martin. That's why we need your wisdom.
Well, I'm still on jet lag, boys, so it's something like 4:15.
Go get some rest, Martin. Go get some rest.
Brilliant stuff.
Pleasure to talk to you, but sad circumstances that we've had to talk about.
Martin, magnesium. Get some magnesium down here.
Right.
It'll put you to
you
sleep.
Say so.
Put you to sleep.
You say so. I'll be out the door, see if there's any chemists open today.
Martin, I can second that. It's great for sleep. Martin Tyler, iconic football commentator, bring into the fore the great memory of the great man that was Kevin Keegan.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant stuff, that, Coley.
It's always good to hear it from somebody that knows the person personally, and it's just not hearsay. And the way he's described him there lived up to everything I expected to hear about someone like that. And yes, long live King Kev.
Absolutely. Well said. We went well over this section, but it doesn't matter because King Kev absolutely deserves an absolutely stunning tribute like that from Martin Tyler.